Hey everyone, James here from TDB, bringing you another Inbetweenisode. So today I am going to be going back to our yearbook reference tea series. So if you are unfamiliar with that, please check out some of the earlier episodes I did. I think kind of in mid-2022. I rewatched a couple of those episodes just before shooting this, just to make sure I didn't miss anything. And so one of the things we did in those episodes is thanks to Tim. So thank you very much, Tim. He sent me a number of these teas from the Xiaguan series in 2003-2004 range that I was able to feature on the show. These are, I would say semi-famous teas. They're definitely the sort of teas that people know, and you're going to find them in the yearbooks and that sort of thing back when they were doing those yearbooks, and there's a lot more teas to be calculated within there. And they sort of occupy this range that I would say is kind of expensive, but it's certainly not like the top I'm spending $1,000 a cake in. This is more of like probably, I'd imagine, a few $100s per cake or so. And so it's a series of 5 cakes. Tim had sent me the other 4, and because I am a bit of a completionist, and because that's also part of the purpose of this project of just sort of documenting my own thoughts on these reference teas, keeping in mind that every storage and stuff like that can all be different, and there's a lot of natural variance there, but doing my best to just kind of document what I think of these teas when I am trying them. So again, thank you, Tim, for sending this. He sent this one a couple months ago, so just getting to it now. And so it's the artistic fonts. Unfortunately, my memory of the previous teas is not quite as strong because I did drink those teas and finish those samples a few months back. But still, I think imperfect is better than not at all in this case. So I have steep number 3 here. Gonna boil the water to make steep number 4 too shortly. And so one reason I like to start on kind of these mid steeps too is because I'm usually only really have the bandwidth to do 3 or 4 steeps on camera at the most, especially when I'm going solo. And so I like to kind of get those first couple steeps, which often are kind of a filling them out part of the tea, especially because it is compressed, and so sometimes those steeps will really not be very representative of the tea in general. So I know I've talked about that in the past, but in case you are watching in TDB episode, or if you forgot or anything like that, just wanted to mention that as well. So the aroma too is going to change a little bit as it cools down. I did note earlier that this had a very, very Xiaguan aroma, more so than I think the flavor profile in general is. Not that it differs from Xiaguan, but when I smelled it there, the leaves had cooled down a little bit. But it sort of gave off this warm, woody, sweet aroma to it. Okay, so I am going to steep this now, and we will drink steep number 3, and we will slowly wait for this one to cool down. Yeah, so the 5 different teas in this set are the Hong Yin, which was my favorite up until now, the Grade A and the Grade B Blue Marks, and this is the artistic fonts, and the quality stamp, of course, which I think is usually labeled as an 8653. And my favorite in the previous one was the Hong Yin, which I think is a fairly atypical Xiaguan, with the other ones kind of varying from kind of classical Xiaguan to a little bit different from the average. Interesting. Definitely a lot of woody tones from it. I think it smells on the drier side of things rather than being juicier. I was getting a lot of Xiaguan more aromas earlier, maybe on like steep 2 or so. So interesting to note. Here we go, steep number 3. So very slightly dry, but a very kind of full sweetness that you get here. I would say the texture is mainly pretty slick, but also offers like a little bit of thickness to kind of chew into. I would say light to medium bitterness here, and a good accompanying sweetness here. And let's sit with those flavors for just a second and see how they sort of sit and evolve in the mouth, and see what kind of aftertaste. Getting a bit of salivation, nice sort of retreat sweetness in the back of the mouth. I think like all 5 of these teas, this is a very quality tea. I think there's a big difference between trying something like this and kind of the more recent factory teas. If you were to try kind of an average factory tea now, I think the quality is certainly a fair amount lower than it was back in 2003, 2004. Yeah, there's a little bit of dryness to it. So I do think, like these other teas, it does have some room to age. I do think this one might actually be closer to the zone where I would consider drinkable, or like at sort of the optimal zone. I personally would be totally okay with drinking this on the regular, at least from that first steep. There definitely is a little bit of astringency and dryness that could be aged out to it. Personally, for me, I like it when the teas tend to smooth out more, and I feel like this tea is kind of 80 to 85% there, meaning it's pretty acceptable for me to drink now. Would it be better in 5 years? Probably. Cheers. Now it kind of has this very sort of full bouquet to it. It's not. I would say if this is Taiwan stored, it's certainly on the dry end of Taiwan storage in kind of a good way. It brings out a lot more of those sweetness. It's not really deep and earthy at this point too. That probably speaks more to the tea storage than the actual tea material itself, but something worth noting. I'd say it does start to have some like sort of sweet, sticky mentholiness to it. I do get that in a number of Xiaguan, so I do like that. I would say as far as like Xiaguan characteristics, this one's probably, about average. You can certainly see the Xiaguan in this tea. It's not one that screams, I am Xiaguan, like other ones. I think things like the retired smoke, while there, is a little bit, it's not super present as it is in some other ones too. Yeah, and this one I'd say the thing that really makes it stand out for me is both that texture, which is kind of this kind of syrupy thing, but also a decent body there, but also the sweetness and the smoothness for this. For me, at least, this tea is probably the closest of the 5, of course, judging from memory, to being drinkable. And I think that's interesting because I think the storage, too, is not the most aggressive, too. It's very clean. I don't detect much dankness at all to the storage, too. So I think that lends me to kind of lean towards the hypothesis that the material here is kind of lending itself towards a little bit of a more ready to drink at kind of year 19, year 20 mark rather than this needs like another 10 years. Because something like the Hongyan and I think the quality stamp, the 8653, I think both of those were kind of 2 of my previous favorites in the last one, and those were both sort of like, ooh, this is really good. I can see the potential of the material here. I would personally give this 5 or 10 years. For me, I'd say, yeah, would you ideally give this 5 or 10 years? Yes. But I do think this is probably, at least if I were to kind of test these with speed test or something like that, I think this is the one that I would reach for the most often. Yeah, and it's just leaving this kind of nice sweetness here. It's a little bit of drying going on, so I'll probably drink a little bit of water after this session, but it's definitely a pretty highly enjoyable tea. I get just a little bit of kind of those herbal notes and stuff to it too, which I personally dig. So yeah, I am going to give this a 6.6 rating, which is kind of right in the middle of those teas. I think I still probably prefer the Hongyan, or at least I would grade that higher. And for those not familiar, a 6.6 is a pretty darn impressive tea on my rating. It's definitely well above average as far as these things go. So thank you very much to Tim for letting me complete the series here on TDB. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. I do have a couple more Xiaguan teas from Tim that I do hope to bring on and cover on the show. So I apologize for being a little slow at these. I do tend to pre-schedule a lot, so it can be a little bit of time before I'm able to feature every tea properly. But definitely this is a tea that deserves its due. So let me know if you've tried any of these teas before. They have, I believe, a 2009 and maybe 2010 or 2011 series of these same teas that are a lot cheaper. I don't think the quality is quite as good, but they are interesting. So for those that are interested and looking for a little bit of a cheaper alternative, don't want to spend several $100s on a cake or something like that, those teas might be worth checking out too, because they do stand out as being a little bit different from kind of your standard Xiaguan. If we define Xiaguan as sort of like these green box Jiaji, or the something like 8653 Iron Cake, something like that. All right, well, thank you all for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the episode. I will see you all next time.